Welcome back to another episode of Vintage Digicam Tales, and today is the turn of the Sony Cyber-shot DSC F505. Not only one of the most iconic cameras of its day, but arguably Sony's best consumer digital camera to date. In this video, I'll show you what made the F505 so special back then, and also try it out on the streets of Brighton over 23 years after it was originally launched. Now, it was one of my favourite cameras when I originally reviewed it, but does it still hold the same charm today? Let's find out. Announced in mid-1999 at a price of around $1,100 or £900, the F505 packed 2.1 megapixels and an impressive 5x optical zoom into a unique L-shaped body. I bought an untested model for just £15 from eBay in 2023, which, like many vintage cameras, sprung back to life given a new battery. In use, you rest the large barrel in your left hand and twist the compact grip portion with your right, angling the screen for easier composition. Now, while twisting bodies were actually commonplace in the early days of digital camera history, Sony's design for the F505 was pretty unique and a departure from previous models in the F series. Sony's first consumer digital stills camera, the F1, launched in 1996, sported 1/3 of a megapixel, 4 megabytes of built-in memory, and a lens housing which could rotate by 180 degrees. It really embraced the idea that digital cameras didn't need to actually look like traditional film models and still looks modern a quarter of a century later. What do you think? The F1 spawned a handful of successors, including the F505, which arrived in early '99 and became the first Cyber-shot DSC camera with a dedicated slot for Sony's new memory sticks, as well as a Carl Zeiss branded lens. While the F505 isn't particularly well known today, its headline upgrades were key to Sony's success going forward. The limited built-in memory and awkward serial interface of earlier models was resolved by employing removable memory cards, albeit using their own new proprietary format, while working with a well-known lens company gave Sony respectability with camera enthusiasts. The F505 wore both strategies with literal badges of pride, sporting a large memory stick logo on the main body and Carl Zeiss branding on the top and front of the lens barrel. But it's of course the body shape that you notice first, and it's testament to Sony's design centre that the F505 almost immediately reprograms decades of traditional camera muscle memory, with your left hand intuitively supporting the substantial barrel, leaving your right to operate the main controls and twist the body for comfortable composition. It remains a genuinely usable design too, with the screen section angling up by 90 degrees for waist level shooting, or down by about 50 for easier framing at higher angles. The twisting mechanism feels smooth with just the right amount of resistance and a satisfying notch in the straight ahead position. In general use, I tend to angle the screen up by about 45 degrees. This design really makes the F505 a camera of two halves, with the lens, sensor and a handful of controls in the barrel section, leaving the screen, battery, card and main controls in the rear section. When most digital cameras of the time standardized on 3x optical zooms, Sony opted for a longer 5x range, equivalent to 38 to 190mm, taking you from here to here. Then, as now, I wish the lens started a bit wider, but few if any rivals did at the time, and there's certainly no denying the beneficial reach at the long end, allowing you to get much closer to distant subjects. The zoom's motorized and operated by a slider on the main body, which falls naturally below your thumb. Unlike many digital camera zooms which lurched from one focal length to another, the F505 zoom allows fine and smooth adjustments, with the speed proportional to how far you actually push the slider. Now, there's definitely 2, maybe 3 speeds available, and impressively, you can also zoom optically while filming video. The aperture is nice and bright too, starting at f2.8 for roughly the first half of the range, before only closing a little bit to f3.4 for the second half. On the side of the barrel are buttons for the macro mode, white balance options, including a custom preset, and spot metering, along with a switch for auto or manual focus, the latter using the outer ring on the lens barrel to adjust the distance. While we'd have to wait for its successor for any kind of magnified focusing assistance, icons do at least indicate if the subject's in focus or which direction you need to turn the ring. This is still a step up from the handful of preset manual focus distances that most rival cameras offered at the time. On top of the lens barrel is a spring-loaded pop-up flash, while underneath you'll find a tripod thread gratifyingly on the optical axis and freeing up the rear body section. Most of the day-to-day controls are clustered in the upper right side of the rear body. Alongside the zoom slider are the power switch, microphone, shutter release, and the simple 3-position mode dial, letting you choose between playback, stills or movies. The rear of the camera is dominated by a 2-inch screen, and in the absence of a viewfinder, it is the sole means of composition. Like the F1 before it, Sony's gone for a transflective hybrid panel here, which can either reflect ambient light to save power, or flicker switch to power up a conventional backlight under dimmer conditions. Like other reflective panels, the usability is hugely dependent on not just the brightness of the light around you, but also the angle of the screen in relation to that light and your eyes.
This is really amazing. If you've got the sun directly behind you and you angle the screen just right, that reflective technology works really well. I can see the screen really clearly, but only if I angle it exactly right. So the sun's rays are bouncing off it right into my eyeballs. At any other angle, the screen's invisible.
Switching on the backlight won't help much in bright conditions either, and it's mostly for use inside. The hybrid concept was a cunning power saver back in 1999, but improved batteries and backlights meant that Sony would switch technologies on later generations. Alongside the screen, a rocker control navigates the menus and exposure options. Push the Program AE button and you can cycle between Program, Aperture and Shutter Priority, 2 night modes and 2 geared for landscapes with or without a person in the frame. Clicking the Effect menu cycles between negative, sepia, black and white or solarized, while the File menu lets you adjust the image quality, including 2 JPEG compression options and 3 resolutions, albeit no uncompressed option yet. Meanwhile, the Camera menu lets you adjust exposure compensation, the flash level, and whether to allow the digital zoom, which doubles the effective reach, albeit with a loss of quality. Like other cameras at the time, the F505 employed a 2.1 megapixel half-inch type CCD sensor, capturing a maximum resolution of 1600 by 1200 pixels, with a typical file size of about 500 kilobytes using the best quality option. Set the mode dial to movie and you can record video at either 320 by 240 or 160 by 112 pixels, both at a jerky 15 frames per second and for a fixed time of either 5, 10 or 15 seconds per clip, or up to a minute in the low resolution mode if you keep the shutter button pressed down. Videos are recorded with sound, and as you can see from this clip, it's also possible to optically zoom while filming, something quite unusual at the time, and the motors are essentially silent too, a feature that few rivals could manage. Behind a large door on the right side, you'll find the battery and memory card compartment, with the F505 adopting Sony's new memory stick format. These were more robust than smart media and simpler than compact flash, but introduced yet another format into the mix, and Sony didn't win any friends by bundling the F505 with a measly 4 megabyte card, good for around 8 photos using the best quality settings. Thanks for that. For power, the F505 uses an NP-FS11 info-lithium pack, which cunningly reports how many minutes of life are remaining, but you'll need to charge it externally using the supplied AC unit, although this also doubles as a mains adapter for powering the camera if preferred. And finally, in terms of connectivity, the F505 has an AV jack in the lower right corner, outputting composite video and mono sound to a TV, while behind the sliding flap on the top are USB and RS-232 serial I/O ports. The USB plug is annoyingly proprietary, but the supplied cable will at least allow Macs and PCs to present the memory stick's contents as a drive to simply drag files out of. In the absence of a cable, just use a USB memory stick reader, or a later Sony camera with a more standard USB port to read it for you. Okay, that's enough talk. Now for a slideshow of photos that I took with the F505 around Brighton in 2022 and 2023, over 2 decades after it was launched. See you in a minute. The screen won't face forward for framing, there's no optical stabilization, and the clips are only 15 seconds long at 320 by 240 anyway, but maybe that's mercifully short. Let's check out a few more. I'm not ashamed to admit that I absolutely loved the F505 when I originally reviewed it back in 1999, and my feelings haven't changed today. Like many in the F series before and after it, it represented, in my opinion, Sony's design and engineering teams at the top of their game. Not afraid to experiment, but delivering products that were crucially intuitive to use and enjoyable too. Now, I couldn't afford the F505 back in the day, but again, I hunted down a second-hand, untested model on eBay for just £15. It didn't come with the charger, and I later discovered that the original battery wouldn't accept any charge. Not surprising for old lithium-ion packs. Luckily, replacement batteries are available for around $15 or pounds, with AC chargers costing roughly the same. Alternatively, you could track down another camera which shares the same accessories. I found a Sony P1 for sale which came with the mains charger and uses the same battery as the 505, and better still, thanks to its more standard USB port, I can also use it as a memory stick card reader. As for the F series, Sony released the mildly updated F505v roughly 6 months later in the year 2000, sharing essentially the same body and lens, adding an external flash port, uncompressed photo, and MPEG HQ video options, and boosting the sensor resolution. The latter was, however, a controversial upgrade, as while the 505v did house one of Sony's new 3.3 megapixel sensors, it could actually only use 2.6 of them due to the lens, which was originally optimized for a physically smaller sensor. That said, it did allow Sony to extend the life of the otherwise excellent optics and body in a market that quickly standardized on 3.3 megapixels on premium models. But how much better was the V version from the original? To find out, I shot the same scene with both cameras moments apart and zoomed in here for a closer look. Here's the original F505 on the left with its 2.1 megapixels, and the later F505v on the right with its 2.6 actual megapixels. Beyond a different white balance here, remember these cameras are both over 20 years old, I reckon the V version on the right really is resolving slightly finer detail if you're pixel peeping around things like the railings, wires and piping. I wouldn't say it's exactly enough to justify upgrading from the original model, but again it was enough to keep the 505's lens and body competitive for another year. 1 year after that, in 2001, Sony launched the F707, sharing the 5x optical zoom range, but with a 5 megapixel sensor and a chunkier body, followed by the similarly designed F717 a year after that. The F828 followed in 2003, and while that marked the end of the triple-digit F series, the Cyber-shot R1 from 2005 arguably shares some of their design DNA, so I'm counting it as an honorary member here. I adored the F series, and over the past couple of years have managed to track down every single model in the series for my own personal collection, and I'm going to be making videos about all of the others in the future. But in the meantime, I'd love to hear what you thought of them, whether you were an original owner of one back in the day, lucky you, or if, like me, you lusted after one for years before fulfilling that particular fancy decades later. And please do tell me about your first digital camera memories regardless of the model. It's always really great to hear your stories from those early days. And that's it for another retro review. As always, if you'd like me to make more of them, the best way to support me is to simply like this video, subscribe to the channel, and binge watch as many of my other videos as possible. Right, that's your evening sorted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.